Hello, everybody. Sunday Adelaja here. Welcome, welcome, welcome. I want to welcome you and ask you to go share this message. Share with your friends and family members. We're studying the topic, are Black African people cursed? Are Black African people cursed? Are African people cursed? Are Black people cursed? Well, that's what we are going to be dealing with today. And today we are going to be saying no, African people are not cursed. And the topic of today is that African people are blessed. They are not just blessed, it is the blessing of the African people that the old nations of the world are enjoying. Everybody is blessed through Africa. Africa is a blessing to all nations. So that's why I'm talking today on the topic, Africa, the cradle of all nations. The cradle of all nations is the cradle of all civilizations and the cradle of all nations. It is the birthplace of all nations. All nations came out of Africa, and all nations came from the seed of Africa. So Africa is the birthplace, is the cradle, is the beginning of all civilization, and it is the root of all nations. Africa is the root of all nations. So we are going to go into that right now, and we're going to continue the teaching. Please go and inform your people, your friends, and invite them to follow us in this teaching. So let us start by examining a portion of the scientific data proving that these first people lived in Africa. So this is not just my conclusion, and it's not just my opinion. This is a scientific research, and almost all science has now come to the place of agreement that life on Earth started in Africa, and that all other nations originated from Africa. Most scientists have come to believe that the origins of mankind can be traced to Africa. Almost nobody is arguing about that right now. The British scientist Albert Churchward notes that the first members of the human family appeared in Central Africa. So that is a known fact to most of the scientists. These early Africans moved to different corners of the planet and accordingly acquired the differences which today can be found in people living in different parts of the world. Thus, those who remain in the tropical and equatorial regions remain dark-skinned. Those who settled in temperate zones lost some of their pigmentation, and their skin acquired a paler shade. So you understand, if Africans who moved to Europe and to places that are cold, their pigmentation changed and they became light skin. So also, because this is taking place over thousands and thousands and thousands of years. But the ones who remained in Africa, because of the sun and the heat, everything, so they become darker and darker and darker. So that's the gap in the complex of people. Archaeologist Eric Hicks from Cambridge University conducted a study on the migration of ancient people and claimed that the first men in Europe came to this continent from Central and Eastern Africa about 250,000 years ago. According to Professor Chester Shad of the University of Wisconsin, early people who left Africa and settled the rest of the world followed the four prehistoric routes from Africa to Europe. Charles Finch thought points to the available facts that the first Europeans left Africa 40,000 to 50,000 years ago and underwent a local evolution during the last ice age, as a result of which their skin changed from a dark African to a pale European type. Fossils of these ancient Africans were recovered in the cave of Cradle, Monaco, and their statues and images depicting African type Khoisan women dated back to 440,000 years ago to 500 that's 500,000 years ago, were found in large numbers within the range of thousands of miles from France to the Russian part of the Caucasus. Now, how did they discover these things? They discovered that their mouths were drawn and they were depicted like my own, not like the European. Their nose were more like ours, and their features were that of black people. And so those were the archaeological discoveries, things that were not planted there by Africans. There's no way Africans could have taken that there. And the archaeological scientific discovery prove that they are old as these things, and they have the features not of Europeans, but they have the future of Africans. But if they are not Africans, then how will Europeans have discovered this? Why are they not drawing themselves? Why are they not making their own image? And they are making the image of Africans. So it's just a proof. This is science. People, you cannot argue with it. Scientists are no longer surprised by the now indisputable fact established both by physical anthropology and molecular biology that the entire human race in Europe, Asia, or America is a branch from the original line of humanity in Africa. It is believed that they appeared there about 300,000 years ago and began to migrate before 200,000 years before, and began to migrate to other parts of the world about 100,000 years after that. The greatest anthropologist, Runoko Rashidi, also confirms that tens of thousands of years ago, Africans became the first inhabitants of Europe. DNA research and anthropology have confirmed this. For example, the discovery of dozens of figurines across Europe depicting a woman with figure leads not only to the conclusion that Africans of Namakoi type inhabited prehistoric Europe, but also to the fact of worshipping a black woman. Stetopigia determines a type of constitution genetically inherent in some peoples of Africa, where there is a significant accumulation of fat on the buttocks, especially in women. You see those kind of African women everywhere today, right? And that is the image of the woman that was found, the body and the structure of the woman that was found in Europe. Most of the contemporaries of the naturalist Charles Darwin were inclined to believe that Asia was the birthplace of mankind, but Darwin himself was inclined to believe that Africa was the cradle of mankind. Even though that time they had not discovered much of Africa, so they had discovered Europe. Europeans had discovered Asia earlier. So they thought that because Asia is much older than Europe, so they thought that is why that generation thought that they were the ones. But when more research was being done on Africa, then they discovered that no, Africa is even older than the information they got about Asians. Like, for example, in the Bible, there are a lot of references in the Bible to prove that the black men at the cradle, that Africa is the cradle of civilization. For example, the rivers that are described in the Garden of Eden, you discover that some of those rivers in the Garden of Eden are now found in Africa, like Nile, Euphrates. All those rivers are now in Africa. So if those rivers are in Africa, it means the Garden of Eden was in Africa. It means, the beginning of creation was in Africa. Besides that, we also discovered that Adam in the original language means dark skin. So Adam is not just meaning man, but it also means from the word soil. And soil, but the type of soil it's talking about is the soil that is dark soil. So the word Adam is in connection to the man that is made. Man is made from dark soil, and that dark soil is talking about his reflections and about his complexion. and that is that of a black person. Besides that, even science of art and drawing and colors will tell us that every color can come from black color. If you want to paint, from black color you can get every color can come from it. But from white, you cannot. You are limited. You cannot get even black from white, you see. So, but from black, every other color could be formatted from it. And so that's why, so even for Adam, for every other color, or every other race to come out of Adam, he has to be black. He has to be black. And that is why every other color could emanate from only black. That is science. That is science. Science has proved that. So now the question that most people ask will be, so how did they go? Okay, we have already described how they became white and why they became white. We already mentioned that earlier on. But they became lighter in complexion. But what about continents? How did they travel? How did the African people travel across the sea to go to Europe, and across the sea to go to America, where there was no technology like that to make them cross the hemispheres? Well, there is also a scientific discovery that explains that, because one thing you must know is that the Earth used to be monolith before. The whole planet Earth was just one piece of land, right, with some patches of water, but more unified and monolith kind of land. So what happens is that everything used to be one piece, but there was there were a lot of events that happened, like flood, like all those kind of changes in climate and atmosphere. But at the end of the day, it leads to the separation, because of the water coming from the underground, led to the separation and division of pieces of the earth. And that was also recorded in the Bible. That division of the earth was recorded in the Bible. Not much was said about it, but it gives us the explanation why we have continents today. So it was one piece of the earth before it became continents, and it became continents after the flood. According to the Bible was giving us the report of the flood in Genesis chapter 9, Genesis chapter 10, and how life began to be spread on the earth after the flood. And in that story of how people inhabited the earth after the flood, it gave a story of the moment the earth that came from monolith earth to the continents, when the earth was divided. And that was recorded in the Bible. And the way it was recorded is, sometimes when somebody is when an event happens, they will name the people that are born at that time by the event that happened. So if you go to Genesis chapter 10 in the Bible, Genesis chapter 10 verse 25, you will see that this is actually how the thing was described in the Bible. Genesis 10:25 says, to Eber were born two sons, because it's talking about the geology of Noah after the flood, and how the people who came out of the descendants of Noah began to spread, and they were inheriting the earth. So he's now talking about, got to this man that is called Eber, and this Eber, he had two sons. The name of one of the sons was Peleg. Now, pay attention to that word Peleg, because that will give us explanation of why, black people were able to move to Europe, and why we see black people in Europe now. We see black people in Australia. We see black people even in America. Before Colombia, there were black people in the Americas. So how did they get there? There were black people not just in the northern part of America. There were black people in the southern part of America. There were some black people in Asia. There were black people in Australia. So how did they get to all those places? And then, how did the people get to Europe? So this explains it, because it was after the flood, many years after the flood, in the generation of Eber, that he gave birth to 2 sons, and it was during the time of the life of the birth of one of his sons, Peleg, that this division of the earth happened. That was when the earth from monoliths became divided into continents. And it's recorded here in Genesis 10:25. It says, to Eber were born 2 sons. The name of one was Peleg, for in his days, in the days of Peleg, the earth, you see, the planet earth was divided. You see, the planet earth was divided during the days of Peleg, before his brother was born, and his brother's name was Joktan. But this is like a very small verse in the scripture, very small verse, and very very unnoticeable to a lot of people. But if you pay attention to that, you will just see, and science has come to confirm this as well, that yes, this is what happened after the flood, and that I think the weight of the water that was coming from the earth, that covered the whole thing, I think it led to the division of the earth into continents, and that was during the time of Peleg, and it was recorded in the Bible. So but everything before then had started from just like one continent, and from the whole earth, and people had gone all over. So when the earth was divided, everybody remained where they were before the civilization and before technology that is now connecting us to one another. So we had to now begin to do another again, but we were originally one. So scientists also note that the genes of black people are not recessive as in other races. So this means that blacks can genetically give rise to other races, while no race can reproduce a black man. You see, this is also in connection to what I just explained to you about Adam, and that is why Adam had to be black. Adam had to be black because that is the only way all other races could be created. Adam had to be black because that is the only way diversity could be created. Others have to be black because it is only from black, even with the weather condition, it is only from black other colors, other pigmentations could emerge. It cannot be, and the original man couldn't have been white, because if the original man had been white, then you will never be able to become black from white to black. But you can become white from black. If we agree that Adam was the first person, then it can be argued, then it is logical that he was a black man. According to the Bible, Adam was created out of the dust of the earth, you see. In the book by Catherine McGee, Livers, there is an explanation for the phrase Alpha min ha Adama from the Hebrew language. The word Adama, which is the earth, is formed from the word Adam, which stands for black. It also stands for soil. And the very word Adam, man, can be understood as dark or black. You see. So this makes sense, a lot of sense. This is not just from the archaeological point of view, that black and Africa is the cradle of civilization and of humanity, but also from the philological point of view, from the language development point of view, that even the language, the Hebrew language, explains it. And from theological point of view, we also see that, and even from agricultural, from agrarian point of view, everything points to the fact that, and from even art and painting, it all points to the fact that the first man was black. So everybody owns Africa a credit. We need to add, we need to give thanks to Africa for being the mother of all of us. In Akkadian poetry, one of the most ancient Semitic languages, Adam means black-headed, black. black person like my head like this. Another evidence from the field of genetics that humanity came from black people was the information shown in 2009 on the British BBC channel in a series of documentaries called The Incredible Human Journey. In this series, it was demonstrated and revealed that all people living today came from Africa, you see. So it's already a known fact that we are all Africans. Moreover, it turns out to be possible to link all living people to one African black woman in the past. She was called the Eve from Africa. Wow. Today, this position is supported by scientists and is called the hypothesis of mitochondrial Eve. Since the so-called mitochondrial DNA is inherited only through the maternal line, all living people obtain this DNA from this African person. This hypothesis was first published by the team of biochemists of the University of California in 1987 in the journal Nature. According to more recent estimates, the mitochondrial Eve lived about 140,000 years ago in Eastern Africa. We have proven that the first people were black Africans. Other nations, in particular the European ones, descended from these Africans. You can easily imagine your black ancestors, even if you are not a black person yourself. Now, if you look at the figures, you will see that there is no certainty in the figures because nobody knows. It's just approximate. So those years that you are seeing, the numbers of years are approximate. So they are just approximate estimation. So now, if some people consider Africans to be inferior and second grade, then how could they give rise to geniuses in other nations if they are already from them? Let's consider the description of the African influence in the Stone Age as given in the book, The Contribution of Africans. As it was remarkably noted, the hunting, throwing weapon, bowlers, stone knives, canoe paddles, spears, harpoons, bows and arrows, wind guns, hammers, axes, all these were originally invented by Africans and are the result of the first application of human strength. Today's artillery pieces, long-range missiles, ship engines, automatic hammers, gas engines, and even kitchen mend choppers and upholstery button hammers have their roots in the prehistoric use of strength by Africans. Africa gave humanity the first mechanism. They had a burning stick. Thanks to it, a person had a fire at any time. Thanks to it, they could light a fire anywhere. The ancient Africans could fry food. Every time we light a candle, every time we take a bath with hot water, every time we cook food on a gas stove, our use of fire simply continues the process started by the ancient Africans, fire control. Knives, hammers, axes were the first tools of African labor, and it is the production of tools that distinguishes man from other creations. Naturally, these ancient Africans were the first to discover how to build reed huts. They should be the first because for hundreds of thousands of years, they were the only people on the earth. They invented the manufacture of rough baskets and weaving, how to create watertight earthen vessels tempered on fire. In cold weather, they found out that the skin of dead animals were capable of warming them. They even made leather covers for their feet. It was due to their efforts that the production of clothing and footwear was later created. We owe much more to the ancient Africans than we could think. They tamed dogs, used sticks for digging to get to edible roots, discovered grains as a meal, learned how to store and cook them, learned about the fermentation of certain food and liquids left in containers. Thus, mankind is obliged to Africans for dogs who are our friends and protectors, for shovels that are used by farmers, for the cereal we eat for breakfast, for fermented drinks which many people drink, for the woven garments we wear, for the blankets that keep us warm at night, for the dishes in which we bake or cook food, and in general for the very process of boiling water, which we use every time we cook eggs, pasta, or meat. Canoes gave people the opportunity to travel further and farther from home. For many centuries, canoes had been used to go down along the Nile and Congo rivers and go up along smaller rivers and streams. It was in this way that Africa was originally settled. On the basis of the wind gun of the ancient Africans, other devices were subsequently developed according to the same principle. This includes windbags and bellows, a device for air pressing, a bamboo piston pump, a rifle, a pistol, a revolver, an automatic rifle, a machine gun, and even industrial guns that blow out grains. African hunters often shot game. Until now, there are present-day Stone Age images of bones, hearts, and other organs in animals. These were the first steps in the field of anatomy. Ancient Africans conducted a thorough study of the animal and plant life. Thanks to their knowledge of animals, livestock breeding became possible, and their knowledge of plants gave humans agriculture. The organizational form of family, clan, and tribe, all of these were first formed in Africa. Even back then, they understood family relations in the way we understand them now. The clan and tribe created group unit and strength, and it was in these groups that religious practices and beliefs began. When the great leader of the tribe died, he became a god for his tribe. Respect for him, honoring his tribal ministry, and the efforts in trying to appeal to him became a form of worship. The first formal training was the transmission of oral traditions during the ceremony of joining an African tribe. These ceremonies were conducted by people who practiced medicine or traditional religion. From among such people, priests later appeared. African ritual dances became the basis for many subsequent forms of dance. Music already existed in prehistoric Africa. The musical instruments of that time were a reed pipe, single-string instruments, drums, pumpkin rattle, blocks of wooden, and hollow parts. African artists brought drawings and sculpture to common culture of mankind. Therefore, in studying the development of peoples, it is necessary to take into account that the history of mankind is a kind of a relay race. It is impossible to bring a wand to the finish line without someone else transferring it to you. Before that, it is impossible to go all the way on one's own strength by yourself. We did not give birth to life. We did not give birth to civilization, but we picked up the slack. So you should be grateful to the ancient Africans who had been running with all their might so that later other nations could become champions. Okay, this is just elementary introduction to that topic, but tomorrow I'm going to go much deeper into the proofs and arguments of Africa being the cradle of civilization and of all nations, the root of all nations. But I'm going to also show you a video today that will prove the point that I just gave to you today. And my book, I have a book, and my book is called, How Africans Brought Civilization to Europe. And this is all from my research. And, I put all this, my research, in a book. You can get the book, and it's going to give you more in-depth studies about this. But we'll also go and see the video. But before we go to see the video, let's share this message. Let's share this message to our young people and to Africans everywhere, so that they will know who they are, and other nations too will know what Africa and who Africans are. And also, if you have not yet joined my mentorship program, you can go to my blog, sundayadelajablog.com/mentorship, and you could also come to my training, the training that I do, that is called History Makers Training. You just go to the blog as well, sundayadelajablog.com/HMT, History Makers Training, HMT. You'll be able to register there for the next one. I also want to invite you, if you want to join us, to go to Africa, to go to Nigeria. We want to go back to Nigeria to revive and restore the continent. Please go join us by going to sundayadelajablog.com/Nigeria. Okay, and if you want to read my books and get my books, you can get them and read them for free on Kindle Unlimited, or you could, buy them on Amazon, or you could write to my office, and it will be cheaper for you that way than buying on Amazon. And you could not just buy them in my office, but you could buy them in the office and also become distributors of the books. And the way to do that is by writing to DSSbooks@gmail.com, DSSbooks@gmail.com, DSSbooks@gmail.com. Well, we'll go and see the video right now, and tomorrow I will continue the teaching. Thank you so much.
We'll be the first to admit it is not often you find answers to life's most existential questions, especially in cable news. Questions like, who are we? Where do we come from? How are we all connected? But our specialist today is a geneticist whose groundbreaking DNA research provides some new clues into some of those very quandaries, at least when it comes to our physical constitution. It paints a picture of a deep and interwoven American ancestry in the process, and joining us now is Professor Brian Sykes, human genetics professor at Oxford University and author of DNA USA, a genetic biography of America. What don't we know that you do know about our genetic history that is most startling, you think?
I think I know everything about your genetic history.
So when you look at it, what's
not yours personally, Dylan.
No, well, not yet.
That can be done with relative ease.
I'll give you a cheek swab at the
I
end.
won't leave without one.
But when you look at the analysis, what bore itself out?
Well, fundamentally, what I was interested in in looking at America is that here you have a fantastic convergence of three continents from a genetic point of view. I just wanted to see how they mixed up, what it showed about individual origins, even within people, how different parts of their genes had come from different places and what they thought about it.
What'd you find?
There's a lot of mixing, but as you would have guessed, but it's not just that you have African Americans and Native Americans, American and European Americans. Within their DNA, you can see traces of almost all of those in almost everybody. I, for example, discovered that I have a piece of African DNA. I've got an African ancestor somewhere or other. It helps run my pancreas. So
in a nutshell, we are all everybody.
Yeah,
to varying degrees.
We're all everybody. So it's not just the individuals are mixed up in America, but you've got that mixture within yourself, and your genes are cooperating with each other, because if they didn't, you'd be dead.
I think I understand from your research that you think that America may have had some European visitors sort of before 1492. It sort of dates back earlier than that. Can you expand on that?
Yeah, this is work that uses a very, very good indicator of ancestry, which is a piece of DNA inherited down the maternal line. Now, when Native American ancestry was worked on, I have to say, usually without permission from the people involved, which was scandalous. But when that was looked at, there were four groups of people four groups of ancestors that made up the majority of Native Americans. However, in recent years, a fifth group has been identified, particularly in tribes that live close to the Great Lakes, the Ojibwe tribe in particular. And the matches with the four main groups of Native Americans are from Siberia and Eastern Asia. But in the Great Lakes, this particular cluster of DNA comes not from Asia, there's no trace of it there, but from Europe. So I think Around about the same time, something about 10,000 years ago, there was a small group of people that came from Europe, directly over the Atlantic, which was partly frozen then, so could have got round at the edge of the ice. And I think that's the most likely explanation for what we see in a small proportion of Native Americans.
Kim?
Well, in American society today, we definitely see there is significant racial sort of grouping off. There's intermarriage between blacks and whites and Asians and whites, but that's the exception in my observation. So I guess how much does it matter how much a country like ours sort of intermixes racially? Does it make a big difference? Would we be more the same if there's more Asian and European and African intermarriage, or does that not make a difference very much physically and physiologically?
Well, you're sort of asking the question if it was totally mixed up, whether all Americans look identical, or they wouldn't. But there's an enormous amount of mixing has already taken place, whether or not it's acknowledged. For example, amongst African Americans, I don't think there are any African Americans that don't have some European ancestry. And talking to my volunteers, I went all around the country getting samples from African Americans, European Americans. Some of them were surprised and thought they didn't have any European ancestors, but they certainly all do. I mean, I'd be most surprised if I found one that didn't. Amongst European Americans, particularly in the South, I didn't find any that didn't have some African ancestors as well.
So you mean Spain, Italy?
No, I mean
southern U.S. Okay.
The southern U.S. That's and so all of the, I didn't ask for DNA from hundreds or thousands of people, but all of the ones I did test, all the volunteers from the South, the European Americans, had quite substantial sometimes elements of African DNA, so they had African ancestors. So it's a bit ironic because the one drop rule, which you probably know about, would have classified them all as slaves.
That's sort of
everybody in the South would be enslaved by the one drop rule.
But one thing I regret I never did manage to find was an extreme white supremacist or a member of the Ku Klux Klan, because had I tested them, and if they were from the South, I'm pretty sure they would have had some African DNA. My next question would have been, because one of the great things about this particular test is you can identify which genes you've got from where. So let's say a member of the Ku Klux Klan had a gene which was controlling his kidneys, for example, from an African ancestor. Would he rather do without his kidneys? I think not, but I would love to have asked the question.
How many people did you sample? I mean, in some ways, it's almost curious to me that we don't see even more of this. I know that we approach it from the idea of expecting that everyone is sort of genetically somewhat homogeneous, but I would imagine there's a lot of this.
Oh yes, yeah, there is. I mean, it's probably least noticeable amongst the, which again surprised me, amongst the descendants of early New England settlers. I asked for volunteers amongst people whose ancestors arrived before 1650, and I thought, well, I'm hardly going to get any, but I had hundreds and hundreds of volunteers. I was expecting, as a geneticist you tend to have rather jaundiced view about mating practices, I was expecting to find a lot of Native American ancestry there amongst the descendants of the early settlers, but I didn't. I only found it in one instance. A man who knew he had a Mohawk ancestor, I was able to show that that Mohawk ancestor had given him some DNA that was actually controlling his blood group.
Very quickly, and this is a big question for a short period of time, but if, in fact, most human beings carry the genes for pretty much every race, to some degree or another, which is what you're asserting, that a lot of us carry a wide mixture of a wide variety of racial history, such that genetically we are effectively everybody, even though I look like a certain, we all have an outward appearance. What are the implications for racism if we're all carrying the same gene pool?
Well, this would take hours to even define what racism meant, but it demonstrates once again that there's no one-to-one biological equivalence between race and biology.
The other long conversation we can't have now as a geneticist is your jaundiced view of male-female relations. You're a man who knows too much for about too many people. Professor, a pleasure. Congratulations on the book. Check it out, DNA USA, a genetic biography of America.